Okay, it's 10:29. We'll have to start in about a minute. I'm sure people will join as we go along, so we'll see. All right, should we start?
Yeah, let's roll it.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Everybody who's joined us, taking this time out on a Saturday morning. I want to thank each and every one of you who are here, each and every one of you who applied to our Soar program. I especially want to thank our ecosystem partners, Amazon Web Services, Cisco, Freshworks, Intel Maker Lab, GeoGen Next, Agni, and Invest India. Along with them, TIE Delhi and the Internet and Mobile Association of India, who helped us in promoting this program, getting all of you to know about it and coming on board. A huge word of appreciation for them. I'm Mohit. I'm part of the Your Nest team, and I am joined today by three of our partners, Girish Shivani, Dr. Vivek Mansingh, and Satish Mugulavalli. We are assisted by another of our teammates, Akshat Bhatnagar and Sanjay Jha. And our technical support is being provided by our friend Ganesh Ram, whose birthday it also happens to be today. So it's a good idea for all of you to wish him in silence or wherever you are. So thank you, Ganesh, once again, and many happy returns of the day. This is the broad structure that we will be following today. I'm going to kick off with a quick set of one-line introductions by Girish, Vivek, and Satish, and specifically, I will want them to tell us one interesting thing about themselves that we may not be aware of. Then Girish will do an update on the Soar program, followed by Dr. Mansingh, who will do a fairly detailed session on what it takes for startups to really take off and fly. At the end of that session, we will get Satish to give us an idea of how we've done the shortlisting, because many of you have been asking us this question, and he'll give us an idea of that. And as the questions keep coming from you, we'll bunch them together and answer them at the end of it. So this is the broad structure of it. Before we get Girish, Vivek, and Satish to actually start their sessions, I'm going to ask Girish to give me a one line about himself, which makes him interesting, followed by Vivek, followed by Satish, and then I will hand over to Girish for his session. So Girish, all yours.
Tell us. During this lockdown, I have honed my cookery skills, and gotten to a stage where some of the dishes that I'm doing now are coming really, really nicely and well.
Excellent. Vivek?
Yes, generally the line I quote, I'll quote again, that I have been very fortunate to work with people like David Packard, Bill Hewlett, Michael Dell, Steve Jobs, and John Chambers, and learn a ton from them.
Satish?
Well, I mean, you have just put me in a spot, because I don't think there's anything interesting to share about me. And like just Girish said, is found as cookery skills. I've found some, I've just expanded what I eat, because I've been being fed with some interesting stuff.
Lovely. Okay, and on that note itself, let me just move to a very quick one line on who we are. And by now, a lot of you would have done your homework on Your Nest. You visited our website. You engaged with us in some way. But essentially, we are a very sharply focused pre-Series A fund house established in 2011 with a mission to nurture global market leaders from India. We invest in technology-led, enterprise-driven, that's B2B, SaaS and deep tech companies in some of these fields that you can see on your screen. We've had one fund earlier. We're now in the middle of our second fund, which is the fund through which the startups are being invested in the Soar program. You will also see an interesting word down there called challenge-engineer, and that's our vision, which is that we challenge and we re-engineer. We get our portfolio companies and the founders to do this, and we do this to ourselves all the time. So we're constantly challenge engineering. And now we're hoping that we will be able to challenge engineer for a post-COVID world and make the world, a better place with all of the startups that we fund. At this point, I'm going to ask Girish to come in and take over. I will stop sharing my screen so that Girish can start his. Over to you, Girish.
Thank you, Mohit. Gentlemen, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Girish.
Good, thank you. So thanks for being here on a Saturday morning, all of you. I see we already have about 112 participants logged into to this webinar. The intent of this section is to essentially walk you through what was the thesis behind putting the Soar program together and some of the key findings that we got from the applicants, from the applications that we received. Some of it is in sync with the categories, etc., that we've been receiving as part of our regular deal flow. But there are some other interesting insights that I would want to share with you. So just jumping straight into this. So as Mohit already briefed you about what we do. So we are essentially a pre-Series A focused fund, now currently in the second fund. This fund was launched in 2017. Our sweet spot from an investment perspective is to do $500,000 to $1 million kind of ticket sizes and take anywhere between 15 to 25% stake in the underlying opportunities that we invest in. The fund focus is primarily B2B or B2B2C. So we are looking at opportunities across the SaaS domain as well as around the deep tech domain, which I typically classify into two legs. One is the hardware leg around it, which is IoT, sensors, robotics, wearables, and the other one is the software leg around it, which is all about machine learning, distributed ledger technologies, AR, VR, etc. The typical stage at which we want to come in is essentially, at the stage when the product market fit has been established or early signs of that fitment are there. The company should have, a revenue model validated in that sense. But that is what we do traditionally. For the Soar program, we have actually looked at opportunities which were also early revenue or pre-revenue in some cases as well. The focus, as I told you, is purely from a deep tech perspective, both hardware and software. This is a glimpse in the portfolio across the two funds. We've looked at two broad arms to it. One is digitizing the life at work and other is smart physical systems. So we are invested in opportunities which are in the space of conversational AI, speech biometrics, immersive technologies, AI, robotic process automation, testing automation. Some fintech plays in the digitizing life at work as well, with verifiable digital identity being the cornerstone. On the smart physical side, we've invested in hardware products across SD-WAN platforms as well as across platforms which are helping LiDAR companies leverage their solutions. We've done some wearables, and we've also invested in Nico, which is a robotic company based out of Bombay. So that gives you a brief insight into the kind of companies we invest in and look for from an investment perspective. Going to the next slide. This is what we launched the Soar. This is the genesis of the Soar program. Because we had companies which had supply chains in China, we had early insights into what was happening out there. And we early enough realized that this COVID-19 thing it could become a large black swan event from a funding perspective. And with that at the back of our minds, we actually looked at our portfolio fairly deeply from an impact and vulnerability perspective as early as March, mid-March, and got it to a stage where we thought we were comfortable looking at newer opportunities because the VC ecosystem was actually literally shutting down in end March, early April. People were trying to figure out what's happening to their portfolios. New investments were taking a back seat. Some data points that we saw was that early stage investments was down 74-75% between March and April. So there was really a slowdown in that sense from a new opportunity funding perspective. And at a fund level, we had enough dry powder to continue fresh deployments and start to continue to look at opportunities which would fit into our investment thesis. So we basically came down to a construct which was a very tight 2-week application program with clearly articulated stages and selection criteria for the opportunities that we wanted to invest in. The intent was to cast the net wide enough and capture opportunities across the broad spectrum of our investment thesis, and that's the reason a lot of partnerships with AWS, Freshworks, GeoNext, Intel, etc., TIE came into play, and we got it to a stage where a very focused digital marketing effort was put behind the program, so that there was enough visibility within the ecosystem, for people to apply to the program. And what we did was we also as part of the thesis said that we would start looking at some pre-revenue opportunities as well that could potentially come to fore in the next 6 to 12 months and could be interesting from a portfolio construct perspective. And the intent was to turn around this entire process from evaluation to term sheet within 4 weeks of closure. I'm happy to tell you that we are actually at the stage where we should be able to close this in the next 10 days or so. In fact, in one of the underlying portfolio companies, we have gotten to a stage where term sheet discussions have already started. And our expectation was that we would end up between anywhere between 700 to 800 applications, shortlist up to 5 companies within our investment thesis and add to the portfolio. And so that was the broad construct of the Soar program. Let me just now jump straight into what is it that we found out when we started looking at the application flow from folks like yourselves. So this is what we landed up with. I'm talking about the top right-hand chart now. We ended up with about 1,933 applications across the entire program across 2 weeks. We ended up with close to 850 odd applications on the last day itself. And so if you look at the chart below that, which talks about deadline, day hour-wise application submission, in the last hour, we got 243 applications. On a lighter note, I wanted to say that, we are literally like a rocket ecosystem. Until our backsides are on fire, we really don't, gain escape momentum. And if I were to look at it from a top 15 cities perspective, this is in sync with what we typically see in our deal flow. Bangalore and NCR combined, where New Delhi, Gurgaon, and Noida are typically neck to neck from in our deal flow as well. But the percentages are different. So, and in this case, we had a much wider representation from cities like Bhubaneswar, Jaipur, Indore, etc., which was quite interesting to see. And I guess a lot of Invest India emails landed in mailboxes, which typically won't have access to a platform like this if we had used the regular channels. Going to the next slide. This is how this entire 1933 companies split by various categories. So if I were to look at the first chart in orange and red, 75% of applicants had a startup certificate from DPIIT, which meant that at least the Startup India program the government of India is running is actually doing a lot of interesting stuff, and DPIIT is giving enough SOPs for people to go out and register there. The chart below that, the green one, is about how founders split between startup experience and non-startup experience. So 36% of the founders startups we looked at actually had founders had startup experience earlier. The chart in the violet, the third one, is about 50% of the applicants had at least 2 founders. There were 19% applicants who had 3 founders as well. But we ended up with about 22% companies which had single founders as well. The chart below that, from a WorkX perspective, 43% of the founders, CEOs, actually had less than 10 years of experience, which meant that the average age of the founder literally was in the late 20s or the early 30s from a blend perspective. Going to the next slide, this talks about how it broke up. The first chart, the one in the orange, talks about how it broke about by the category. AI, ML, and enterprise SaaS accounted for 48% of the applications, and this accounts for people who also actually ticked multiple check boxes there, because you could do that. So if you had an enterprise SaaS company with a cloud offering, you would appear twice here. And from a sector perspective, EdTech and FinTech, EdTech and Health Tech accounted for close to 32%, which is generally what we see in our regular deal flow as well. Between these two, typical spreads are in the ballpark of 15-16% month on month that we get. And again, here also, if you had ticked multiple boxes, you would be there in those categories and would have been accounted for like that. Going to the next slide, this is on IP and funding. 27% of applicants actually had already been granted patents or had applied for patents, which means that there's a lot of IP work happening in the country. And 27% of 1900 is close to 450 odd people or startups, and that's a really large number. And 61% of applicants were bootstrapped, 39% had some sort of funding, 14% were incubated or accelerated, and we had about 22% applicants which were actually angel funded, seed funded, or already 10 Series A or pre-Series A as well. Going to the next slide, this is the revenue analysis. 53% of applicants had already booked revenue, whether through pilots or with revenue model validation. And there were, if I were to look at the split by revenue, 48% companies were pre-revenue, 26% of companies were between 0 to 10 lakhs of quarterly revenue, and there were 26% companies which had actually quarterly revenues of more than 10 lakhs as well. So therefore, from that perspective, the entire program actually gave us a lot of opportunities, which fell right in the bang middle of our investment thesis, which was deep tech, revenue model validated, deal sizes which were manageable, IP-led opportunities from a selection criteria perspective. This was the business model analysis in terms of what kind of business models were people looking at. Again, here, if you had clicked multiple buttons on both these charts, you would be accounted for here twice. So 55% of all applications were subscription and product sales revenue led, which is our focus as well. And 56% of applicants had enterprise and SMBs as their customers. But it was interesting to see that out of these 1933 applications, only 27% of applications were actually very sharply focused on a single customer set. And some of my colleagues will talk about this in the later part of the presentation as well. So that brings me to the end of the slide and my portion of the presentation. I will just hand it over to Mohit for taking this forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Girish. I think that's a very, very detailed analysis. What it doesn't actually capture is the sheer number of hours, I think, that we spent as a team analyzing each and every application that came in equal attention and equal detail. There is a question that Ashish Asgekar has asked, which is, can you tell us if the late submissions suffered in funding compared to early entries? And I would like to dispel any notion that anybody may have, because even though we saw that huge spike on the last day and we hit 1,933 applications, we actually stayed up many nights to make sure that every single application got as much attention as the very first application had got from all the partners and all our team members who were involved in the selection process. But thank you, Girish, for this very detailed analysis of what happened, how we've done, and I think it will help the founders at some point as well. I'd now like to hand over to Vivek, to Dr. Mansingh, to walk us through his session, which is a very inspirational section on what it takes to actually make a startup fly. And this is not specifically about any one startup or any startup that may be selected or may not be selected in the Soar program here, but it's something that every founder should take away and value. Over to you, Vivek.
Mohit, you can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
You can see it, right?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't hear you. Okay, so let me just start. Thank you for joining. My screen is taking a little bit of time to, I guess, move to the next window. So give me a minute. Mohit, it is not moving to the next slide. Okay, all right. Thank you. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you, Mohit and Girish. Let me first of all say thank you to all the people who have joined. And but let me begin by my salute to all the entrepreneurs who are online here. And there are two reasons for that. One is that in my 35 years of career in US and India, there are a large number of people who worked with me or at any level wanted to do a startup, but never had courage to actually do it. You guys have at least broken that shackle and have taken the next step and are doing a startup. So congratulations to you. And the second reason why I want to salute you is because if you look at what India needs two very important things. One is economic development and second is job creation. And entrepreneurs are going to make a big impact on that. There are 30,000 startups in India. If even 1,000 of them make it to $100 million revenue, it will be $100 billion revenue, which amounts to 4% of GDP growth. So guys, I salute you for one, taking the courage and moving to this playing field. And second is that the nation needs you more than maybe you need yourself. The second point here is that entrepreneurs have the biggest pain or gain in a startup. Please understand that it's not VC, it is not everyone else. It is really the founders, the entrepreneurs who enjoy the big gains when things work, but also have to feel the pain if things do not go well. So what is important here? You have already broken the shackles. Now you have started playing your innings. You need to play the innings well, the best possible innings you can play. And this chance will not come again and again. So you have to play this particular innings well. And what you need to do that is you need to learn the best practices and you need to do the best you can. So I'm going to share some tips that have come from Soar program. Some have come from my experience, but many of you will benefit from that. Not every tip is important for every one of you, but many tips are important for many of you. Let me guarantee something. Those couple of tips that you can learn from in the next 25 minutes, if you implement that in your startup, as an entrepreneur, you will go to the next level and your startup will go to the next orbit. That is my guarantee. So please pay attention to the next 25 odd minutes. You will definitely learn a few things that can propel your startup to a next orbit and make your startup fly. So let us first of all take what do VCs look for. The first thing we look for is actually you as a founder. You are it, if you ask me. So we are looking at you like anything. What we are looking for in you? We are looking for strong human values, of integrity, passion, commitment, optimism, compassion, and gratitude. Why this is important is because this enables you to build a powerful organization. These are very important qualities to have as a human being that turns into leadership qualities, and that helps you build a very powerful organization. A powerful shared sense of purpose related to a bigger vision. So if there are 2-3 founders, we want to see that vision shared, not just CEO's vision or any one of the people's vision. We need to see knowledge, and we need to see that you are far ahead of others. So in the area that you have chosen to work, make sure you have the breadth and depth of knowledge, and make sure you equip yourself with that. It's very, very important. We also look for humility. We want to work with people who are opening to learning, opening to getting coached. And I'll tell you an incident with John Chambers in my last meeting. He has his own fund, J2C fund, and he openly said that I do not work with any founder who is not open to learning, because if you stop learning, you can't evolve. So these are the 4 or 5 things we are looking for in you. So when you come in front of the VCs, please understand that your company presentation is important anyways, but you are also important. Just like you go for an interview, for example, how much prepared you are. Similarly here, first thing we are looking at you and make sure you are prepared. The next thing we look for is your team, not just you. If you are a 1 founder, 2 founder, that is fine. But then what is your team? Does it have the experience to do the job that you are planning to do? Do you have the domain expertise? Do you have diverse skill sets? Do you have compatibility? Compatibility is also very important. 30% of the startups fail due to compatibility issues. The founders have some disagreements and things fall apart, right? So we look for team. We look for diversified skill set. One person may be technology champion, other person could be sales champion, somebody else could be marketing. That creates a very powerful team. We also want to see a big vision for the company. So VCs fund companies that have big vision. They want to do big things. $100 million company, $1 billion company. In India, generally $100 million game is fair enough. So we want to see that in the founder, the capability as well as the plan and the vision that they can do that. Strong differentiated value proposition in what your startup does. And I will come back to this point because this is probably another big part of the game. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Validation of business model and product. So we would like to see that you have some paying customers, you have some pilots at least, and so that verifies that this product is needed by customers and so on. We also want to see, this is not the last round of funding you will do. You will do Series A, you will do pre-Series A, Series A, B, C, whatever, right? So we want to see that you have the ability to raise subsequent round of funding. It's not just we can fund and then what? You need to have the ability to raise subsequent round of funding. And last but not the least, no BS. Why is that important? If some question we ask, which you don't know the answer to, it is perfectly fine to say that, look, I haven't thought through, or I don't know the answer. Let me get back to you. Obviously, you cannot do that 10 times. But yes, if one question that is corner question or you haven't thought through, don't just try to make up an answer, or you can articulate it that way that, look, I'm giving you the best answer I can come up with right now, but I'll actually like to think it over and get back to you with a more comprehensive answer. So this is what we are looking for in your team. Your pitch. When you come on the screen in COVID era, actually all of the evaluation is on the screen, right? We are not meeting face to face. We want to see you as a great storyteller who can captivate even in a video call with passion and belief, right? If 2 or 3 people are in the meeting, all should participate. Many meetings I have attended in the Soar program where there were 2 or 3 founders on the call, but actually some of them remained quiet throughout the call. Well, we want to see you as a team, guys, right? It's important that you all take your pick and talk about what makes you excited about your startup. Know the VC. See, when we go for call, Girish goes, Satish go, I go, Sunil goes, Sanjay goes, we have read about you. But many times I find that VCs, the founders do not know who they are talking to. It takes 30 seconds in today's environment to go to the LinkedIn page of the person and know who this person is, because you can guess a lot from the profile, what kind of questions you are going to get, what this person is going to look for, and those kind of things. Unlike in interview, where you do not know actually who will interview, here you know very clearly, today your interview is with Sunil, today your interview is with Vivek, or maybe two of us. At least open their LinkedIn page and see what they can, because their questions will come from their experience and background. That will give you a lot of insight. In terms of introduction, generally it begins, a call begins with introduction, and you say 60, so I generally tell that, but many people take a long time to do the introduction. My recommendation is you limit it to 60 seconds, 30 seconds about what your experience is, and 30 seconds how this all knowledge and experience relates to the startup you are working with now, your startup. Very important for us to know. Many times people tell us the background, but they are not able to articulate. So why is this startup needing your skill and experience? Very important. You may give a 60-second elevator pitch to begin with, if the VC prefers, or you can go straight to the longer pitch and walk them through it. It's your call. But very important, this is where we are trying to check all the things I talked in 2 previous slides. This is our only window to know that you and your team has what it takes to build a very successful large company. Now, I said differentiated value proposition. This is, guys, if there is one point you can take from me today, it is this: know your space. You spend a lot of time and effort in understanding the competitive landscape. Any of you have done PhDs, and there are many PhDs here. You guys know that the first chapter of PhD is, which takes almost a year, is to find out what is the state of the art. And then you decide the problem you are going to work on. Similarly here, you need to do thorough competitive analysis and then figure out what is going to be your differentiated value proposition. I cannot emphasize it enough. All of you know about competition, but is that good enough, right? And many times what you do is, when I ask this question, when you look at some company as a competition, you try to distance yourself from that. This is my competition, but this is my competition, but. So you are trying to say they do something different, I do something different. That's okay. Maybe that is correct. So now I have started asking a different question. Find a role model company. Who is your role model? Because now you are trying to learn from them and not distance yourself from them. Now, the answer I get is sometimes very valuable, sometimes it is not. Sometimes people will say, my role model company is Cisco. Well, guys, Cisco has 100,000 people working with them, $60 billion in their bank. They are in a very different stage. So aspirationally, if you want to be a Cisco, no harm in that. But ideally, trying to find a startup that is funded in the last year, 2 years, in US, in Germany, in some place in the world, China, and say, this is my role model company. And then my next question will be, so what did you learn from that? Because you already try to distance yourself from the competition. So through this exercise, come up with very strong differentiated value proposition. These 3 words should actually stick in front of your desk. You should be looking at it every day. Differentiated value proposition. 42% of startups fail because their value proposition is actually not good enough. At some point or later, they fall apart. Now, B2B, deep tech, which is the area of our interest, you can build a maybe $20 million company in India. To build a $100 million company, you will have to go to US, Middle East, maybe Europe, and so on. So the differentiated value proposition should stand the global test, not just India test. India, you will be able to build $10, $20 million business, no problem. But then what do you do when you go to globe? Or if the competition comes to India, even in your ground, they can unseat you. Know your TAM. This is another very, very, very big point. Multiple startups have told me how large is your market. They will say billions. Many times I had heard trillion. I heard during this Soar program. My market is $1 trillion. Maybe correct. If you are working in IoT, the market is $15 to $30 trillion. No harm in that answer. But with your resources of 20 people and $500,000 in bank, you are not going to go after $1 trillion market. You need to have very clear segmentation, very niche area within that $1 trillion market where you will go and beat the heck out of everyone else. So large markets, great, but you are not going to be able to figure out your segmentation. That is where it is. Maybe it is because unhappy customers in that segment, they are not getting what they need. There may be many big players, but they can't meet their needs, or underserved by incumbents. Maybe, this segment is not being focused of other companies. So segmentation is another thing, guys, you need to write on your, in front of your seat. Is your segment clear? Because the TAM comes from that segment. TAM is not $1 trillion. TAM is not $1 billion. Once you know your segment, then you figure out what your TAM is. And in a $1 trillion market, maybe your TAM is $2 billion. That is fine. $2 billion is big enough. But don't tell me it's a $1 trillion market. Tell me it's within IoT, I'm working on problem A, which has the TAM of $2 billion growing at the rate of 15% per year. That you will be able to answer only once you know your TAM, you know your differentiated value proposition, and you know your segment. And that decides the rest of the story. What product are you going to develop to meet that segment's demand? Business model, go-to-market, marketing, sales, everything actually depends on that. So if you haven't nailed that down, your differentiated value proposition, your TAM, your segment, everything is off the scale. You will actually have a lot of struggle. Business model. Next, actually, after you have nailed that down, business model comes in. Know your product and the customer segment. Once you know that, you need a viable business model, because then sales, marketing, go-to-market, etc., will align to that business model. Make sure your business model is capital efficient. You are using capital very effectively. You are managing your variable and fixed cost, etc., very, very well. Your pricing strategy has to work very well with your business model. Actually, you should have pricing power. If your differentiated value proposition is strong, you will have pricing power. If you are a Me Too product, you will have no pricing power. Make sure that business model is scalable. How will you create a $100 million company from the business model you have chosen? Maybe your business model is good enough for doing some pilots and getting some 10 odd customers, but it has to be scalable to actually be able to build a large company. 3 gods in your technology team, guys. A CEO, founders, CFO, CIOs, they are not the gods. The product you are developing and your technology team has 3 gods: product manager, industrial designer, or user experience person, and an architect. This I learned from Steve Jobs. You know, the best product manager in the world was Steve Jobs. He knew what product was needed. So make sure you have a good product manager and you have good user experience people and an architect. Now, here is the problem. Generally, in a small startup at early stages, it's CEO's idea, so that person works as product manager. And the CTO or the other partner works on architecture and technology details. Now, see here what happens. Now the CEO gets busy. He has to raise money. She has to raise money. Have to hire right people. Has to build the product, do the sales. So the product manager role in his daily schedule is becoming less and less and less. And so what is happening? The most important role in your company, which is on which the company is betting, is actually being played now by 10% of the time of the CEO. A disaster waiting to happen, because a product manager has to continuously look for where the competition is moving, which new players are coming, and then adjust the product roadmap accordingly. But now the CEO has no time. He's running around with sales. He's running about pilots and raising money. And so product manager role is diminishing. Please make sure it does not happen. And hire industrial designer, user experience, and architect, A-class people. Do not compromise in that. These three people have to be A-class in the company. Keep your innovation quotient high. So VCs love IPs and clear entry barriers. Any startup that does not learn how to continuously innovate will not survive for too long. What do I mean by continuously? I already have a patent. Yes, you had a patent. Now 2 years have passed. Where has competition moved? Do you still have IP that is competitive? So you need to continuously innovate. Watch this continuous word and again write it in front of your desk. Innovation has to be continuous, and it is not a joke to do continuous innovation. File patents as early as possible in the core technology area of yours. So I see companies which have 10 patents. And I say, what is your core technology that you are developing, which is truly your core? How many patents are in that area? So imagine a bull, right? You see the shooting bull, right? The highest points are when you hit the middle circle. And then as you go away from that, the points get less. Well, same is true here. I don't need to see 10 patents. I need to see 2 patents, but in your core area. That is much more valuable. So understand your core and then file patents there. Now let us say why startup world is so confusing. Why do you get confusing sort of signals and advice from people? Let us go all the way to the best we have and see. So take Steve Jobs. Customers are not supposed to know what they need. Well, you need a product manager of caliber of Steve Jobs to be able to say that. But that's a view. Now, take another entrepreneur of our century, Jeff Bezos. He says, work backwards from customer needs to know what to build next. He's saying, walk back from customers' need. Who is right? Well, both are right. Both have built their businesses very successfully by using these very conflicting advice. So that is why you need to be careful. Michael Dell, who I have worked with, used to say, ideas are commodity, execution of them is not, because Dell is built on execution excellence. And if you go to John Chambers, who also I work with, he says, give me an idea and I'll build a company around it. So these are very conflicting ideas, guys, from the best in the world. So obviously, as a young entrepreneur, you will have confusion from time to time. So that is why you need mentors. Any person or any company that does not have mentors will not go beyond a certain level. Now, right mentor. And here is the book I will lift to you. This is called The $1 Trillion Coach. And here in this book, they are talking about coach for the best and the brightest. CEO of Google, CEO of Apple, they need coach. So we need mentors. In startups, we need mentors. I'm a big fan of that, and everyone needs mentors. You can have one or more mentors, but a mentor who can tell you what you don't want to hear, not what you want to hear. And don't dislike a mentor who is paid, because that is the guy who is telling you what you don't have, maybe. Okay? And at least one mentor should have been, and should be someone from the background who has been there, done that. Very, very important. Because entrepreneurship is like swimming. Someone who does not know swimming cannot actually guide you on how to swim. You need someone, at least one mentor. There could be many mentors. There could be some mentor who is describing you on leadership things and HR related things, somebody who is doing technology and helping you with that. All that is fine, but at least one should have been there, done that, because they would have traveled the road you will be going in the next year, 2 or 3. So very, very important that have a strong mentor. So guys, these are the about 10 odd tips I shared with you. Each one of you can at least take 3 to 5, if not more, and take them seriously. Have fun, enjoy the journey, Remember, you will never fail. You will either succeed or you will learn something from this experience. But I want you to succeed. I want you to succeed. The nation needs you. The startup ecosystem needs you. India needs you. So by learning these lessons, play the innings well. Now you have arrived. You have taken the courage. You have come out of shackles and you are playing this game. You are in the middle of stadium. Play your innings well. And how will you be able to do that? One, do the best you can. And two, learn, learn, learn. Right? And make it happen, guys, because it's not just about a startup. India needs you as well. We will need to establish India as a country that can do innovation, can build large B2B type of technology, deep technology companies, can create economic development, and can create lots of jobs for our brothers. So, brothers and sisters, sorry, yeah, lots of jobs for our people. So, thank you so much for joining me. Please, please, please take 3 to 5 ideas from this and think through your own startup and implement it in a way that can help you. And I guarantee, 100% guarantee that you as an entrepreneur will go to the next level and your startup will go to the next orbit. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Vivek. That was really, really inspirational. And I think there's so many tips that the founders will pick up from here, and I hope some of them will implement it. At least some of us definitely do. While we wait for Satish to come up for his session, I'm going to ask Ganesh, who's working in the background, to run the first of 2 polls that we have planned. And there's a poll up on your screen, gentlemen and ladies. If you can just respond to this, we will come up with the results to it while Satish is speaking, or perhaps at the end of it. Please respond to it. Satish, you can take over now and share your screen and get started right after Vivek.
Thanks, Mohit. Just give me a second. Let me pull my screen.
Yes, sure.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning on Saturday. And, you know, I have this complaint that I probably need to take it up. I just realized that I'm always scheduled to speak after Vivek, and it's been a real hard task to follow. You know, so I'll try to do my best. And what I'm going to go through in the next few minutes is about what we specifically look for under the general umbrella of our thesis and what Vivek described. And like most of you know, we invest in both B2B as well as deep tech. And when I say B2B, generally enterprise software, and a large, and a very large possibility in terms of solutions. We have seen over the last few years, software purchasing has moved, reasonably completely to the cloud. And if you look at some data points, the top 50 public SaaS companies in the world have over 700 billion in market cap. Pretty much the business model is SaaS based. There are 1,500 plus product categories. And the very interesting and proud fact is almost close to 50 startups have crossed $5 million in ARR. And out of that, I think we are pretty close to reaching about 10 of them who would cross 25 million. Now, this is no small achievement. And most of these companies have got there in anywhere between 5 to 7 years. And through this process, what we see is a reasonably well-defined playbook on how do you build B2B SaaS companies and how do you market that to the world from India. So this, when we do our evaluation of the companies, we've kind of applied the same playbook, and the understanding of this playbook as far as Indian entrepreneurs are concerned, and several things that Vivek talked about. in terms of segmentation. If you look at one single point, if I want you guys to take from this, is the 1,500 plus product categories, which basically means that there is a niche possibility where you can begin with and address the larger SaaS market in your particular category. So that is something specifically we look for in GTMs. Deep tech, both hardware and software, generally we call systems, semiconductors, and core IP, largely IP driven. Even if you look at not just the Indian companies that are successful in building deep tech, hard tech, or frontier tech, or whatever you want to call, is been very, very IP driven. And the same thesis applies for us. And here's an interesting point here. There is no clear playbook, where you can say, if I'm building a silicon or a semiconductor company out of India, here is what I can do. So this is something that some of you will probably have to learn as you go along. And follow. So there is also some sort of responsibility on you guys as you take your companies forward. So again, I will just go through specifically in terms of B2B. What do we look for? Very large market. Vivek mentioned some of this. When you say very large market, take a look at somebody like Salesforce, over $150 billion in valuation, and addresses a huge amount of categories. So you will find that there is, even for a company like Salesforce, you are not paying attention to a particular customer segment, which could by itself be large enough today for you to build your company and then expand from there. So we either call these segments as some things that are ignored by incumbents, the large companies who are in that space, or something that is very different from what it makes a mass product for these companies, but they can be a good entry point for a startup. Teams, just adding a few things to what Vivek mentioned. Most enterprise B2B software requires experienced team. Unlike in consumer focused companies, if you look at something like WhatsApp or Snapchat, or many of the consumer success stories, which is built by first time young entrepreneurs who have refused to follow status quo and just come up with something. Now, very hard for that to do in the B2B space, because typically your customers will have many different personas. If you're selling to an organization, you probably will have 5 different types of persona in the same organization. And understanding that to each one of these is very hard if you don't come from that industry, or you don't have prior experience or understanding of the problem. Obviously, just like everything in the startup world, exceptions exist. And specifically, we see, if I were to just take one example, in the fintech space in particular, where traditional banking has been moving to neo-banking, where if you don't want to sell software to traditional banks, but you want to create a new side of bank, we've seen first-time entrepreneurs and people who are not from the system being able to create solutions. So there will always be exceptions. But in general, if you don't understand the background deep enough, then it's very hard to build a product for that customer base. And we've also seen that there are possibility of building category creators. On one side, where we try to fit products into some sort of a category, there are also opportunities to create categories. And just like Vivek mentioned, it may appear like this is a little bit of contrasting advice, but there is always a category or a bunch of customers who probably can be grouped, and where you can pick up some insights and say, this looks some 60% similar, and there is a possibility to create a category. And usually what we have seen, that category creators end up owning the category. And what it makes for a VC business is, we're always looking for, in some sense, monopoly possibilities, right? Where you are in a market where it's a winner take all situation, and you could be the winner. Not true in all the cases, but in some cases definitely possible. And like I said, there exists a playbook. People know how to target customers segments from India. The costs are very well defined, and we really want you to understand this. and things like role models and understanding your ecosystem plays a big role here. Because today, if you were to sit in India and sell software to a customer or a small business in Indonesia, you can really identify the cost of customer acquisition, and you can identify or calculate the lifetime value. Now, all of this put together, we need to see some sort of a defense or a moat building up. If you are in a, and this is especially true in the B2B case, where it's very, very hard to build a moat, unlike technology, unlike deep tech, where IP can be your defense. Sometimes in B2B, you see a whole bunch of startups do very well if they are fast followers. So somebody goes and creates a solution, and somebody else comes in and really, I don't want to use the word copy, but comes and builds the same solution and would have some advantage in some other factor of the company, and they go and end up winning the category. So we need to see some sort of moats. So is this moat a technology moat? Is this business model moat? Is it some unique ability that the founding team has to be able to crack this market? But we need to see some sort of an evidence of these moats. So again, since we are in the early stage, and like Girish mentioned, we do look for some sort of customer validation, and largely it comes down to what is generally called in the industry as traction. What is your traction? Do you have customers? Do you have revenues? Do you have pilots? And so on and so forth. Now, here's the important thing, right? In this space, we have seen that, most of you are able to crack some customers, whether it's in the pilot form or in the form of even, revenues. But we do differentiate between what is a good revenue and what is a not so good revenue. Traditionally, again, if you ask people in the startup world, one of the most commonly heard statements is that any revenue is good revenue, which is at a high level correct. But, if you are a SaaS company and you have 2 customers, and these 2 customers have paid you one time for implementing something in and around your product, it's not so good revenue, because it does not give us an evidence of, the customer willing to treat this as a SaaS product and pay subscription revenue for you, or, regular revenue for you. That's why we, anytime you say I have, and this is a common thing we hear from startups saying, oh yeah, I have revenue, I have 10 lakhs in revenue, I have 20 lakhs in revenue. But one of the first things that we do is, what is this kind of revenue? And is this giving us some evidence of the revenue model working for you? And the second thing is, we've all heard about, COVID situations where companies typically don't get paid. Customers don't pay because they're under pressure, or, generally the entire industry is slowing down and so on. And one of the good things about SaaS products is that the solutions are such that they are cloud-based, and you have an ability to control how the solution is offered. And we also want to see some of that being extended to payments. Are you in a position where you can ask for advance payment from the customer? And when I say advance payment, if you're on a yearly subscription, you get an yearly payment, at the beginning of the year. If you're on a quarterly payment, you get the payments at, at the first month in the quarter, rather than after the service is offered. Customers, Girish showed a slide that about 56% or 27%, I don't recollect the number, are in multiple market segments. Now again, this is a little bit of a activity that requires a deep dive from our side, and the way we tend to do that is to see if you are gravitating towards one single customer segment, because the way you market to an SMB or a mid-market and enterprise is very, very different. In the initial stage of the company, you may not have identified this, so you may want to address all markets to see where tractions are. But we want that, to be more of an experimental activity and getting converted to some sort of a direction, as quickly as possible. Secondly, with customer traction, we want to see if multiple customers are using the product for the same use case. And I'll give you some very simple examples. Take a solution like blockchain. Somebody like your big banks, again, somebody like ICICI, is doing 20 pilots with 20 startups, on blockchain. Now, it's very hard for us to measure traction when the market data is something like that. So we tend to gravitate towards solutions where multiple people have used your product, maybe a pilot, maybe some sort of a use case where it tends to converge to a similar problem. So you're not solving problem A for customer A and problem B for customer B using the same technology. The third one is, I talked a little bit about it already, engagement. How engaged are your customers, users? Multiple personas, do they use the product often? If they don't use the product often, whenever use it, if the impact is high. So every time you see, customer traction, these are the things that we break down into to understand what it means. And the final thing is growth. And, industry typically uses these, funky words, in the US, the most popular one is called 3T, 2D, which is after getting to MVP, you triple, and then double and double. So in India, you typically don't see that kind of growth. So we will be very, very pleased if you're on a growth curve where, you can see triple, and then double. So what it means is if you are at, let's say, a million ARR, so you are looking at about 6 million at the end of 2 years, and then doubling 3 years after that, which will get you into 12, 24, and 48. So you are 50 million revenue in about 5 years, and that's a great outcome to have. So let me jump into deep tech. Now, deep tech is very different when it comes to the underlying product and the value in the product. And here's where we look for really innovation. If your product is marginally improving over incumbent solution, then you will hit a wall. Vivek talked quite a bit about differentiation, and I won't repeat that, but essentially improvement over existing incumbents and being able to deeply differentiate your solution. And this is what pretty much every deep tech company. And one piece of comment on the companies that we have seen, especially in the AI and deep learning space, we see a lot of people doing very incremental improvements over existing solution. And these existing solutions sometimes comes from very large companies. So if you are going to take TensorFlow and make some small improvements and fit that into your use case, that differentiation may be there today, but it's not sustainable. So you really need to know that again, your strong tech team, and not just founding team, Vivek has talked about it. I'll skip that. I need to have a strong network, and this network is largely in terms of partners, because most deep tech innovations end up in building system solutions. And when you're doing systems, you will typically not be able to do it all by yourself. You need very strong partners. And I can just relate one example, from my own background. So if you are a chip company and making semiconductors, you really need to have a strong ecosystem partners around who will be ready to tape out your chip, who will be ready to build reference designs for you, and so on and so forth. So you need to walk towards that situation. Entry barriers have to be really, really strong because of your IP, and you need to be capital efficient. Typically it was considered that if it takes about $25 million to build a chip in the US, it should take anywhere between $8 to $10 million. And a lot of that traditionally came from cost savings in terms of people and so on. But that model is long gone. Even if you're building cross-border company, you really need to be capital efficient, which again means that you need to go back and build some strong networks around what you're trying to do. Traction, it's a little more trickier here because many of them are pre-product. They have prototypes. And again, with prototypes, the idea is trying to figure out where the customer discussions are. Is the customer going to design in with your solutions, or are you doing joint development? Trying to understand that. If you're in the engineering sample state, We would like to know what the customer trials are saying. We will talk to customers, and we approach this problem from a perspective of what does it take to win this customer, and what is that single factor why the customer is moving to you. Is it a performance story? Is it a cost story? And so on and so forth. Because by engineering samples, you're already very close to production. And this is true even in hardware or software, and not necessarily system companies. But that is how we view an engineering sample stage company. If you're a little more than that, if you've done a design win, then we will try to understand what the customer forecasting is and what the revenue models are. Because typically when you look at deep tech, some of the solutions you have to understand is being designed in for your customer's product that may get released out 6 to 9 months from when you are designing it. So in terms of competitive landscape, mode, innovation quotient, everything goes 2x higher, because the customer may not be able to take the product out immediately. In some software situations, this is not true, but by and large tries to fit into this particular model. And that's pretty much what I have. And just a quick note on the companies that we've seen. Some of you have been doing amazing amount of work. Especially on the deep tech side, the amount of research that's been done, the technology depth that we have seen. I'm very, very pleased. So congratulations and all the best going forward.
Thank you, Satish. Can you just go back one slide, please? Yeah. Okay.
You want to continue sharing my slides, or should I stop?
No, you can stop. You can stop. I'll take over the screen. Just give me a second. So while I try and get the questions up, and we've had some very, very good questions that have started to come up. I think what Satish has done is that he's shared in extensive detail how we actually went about it, what we looked for, and you will find that this is really the thread that runs through your nest and all the work that we do. I'm going to request Ganesh for a second to bring up the answers to the first poll that we ran. Ganesh? Yes. So it was, how useful has the session been up to now? And this was right after Vivek's session. It was 77% felt it was extremely helpful. 23% felt it was somewhat helpful, which is very, very encouraging for us. And we appreciate your feedback. A lot of you have been giving us feedback on the chat as well. So I'm now going to pull up the questions, and I've got them in 3 or 4 broad buckets. Before I do that, however, I also want to kind of just put one thing out there, that a few of you have said that you didn't hear from us while we were analyzing the applications. And I've just put out a response to one of the people who've asked this question, is that we made sure that every single applicant was responded to. So please just go back and check your mailboxes once again. It may have inadvertently landed up in the spam folder. Just check there once as well. A second question that has come up is a few people asking for specific feedback on why they were not selected. And while we wanted to do that, we had no idea that we would go from the estimated 700 or 800 applications that we expected to 1,933. And it is actually almost impossible for us to go back and analyze document an answer to each of them. While we have the analysis and there were multiple factors, it's difficult for us to respond to each of that. Maybe in some time in the future we will try and do that. But let me jump straight into the questions. And Satish, I'm going to get the first question back to you, which has come from a few people, which is that, is it possible for some of the founders who applied here, some of the startups, to get support from our ecosystem partners like Amazon Web Services and Freshworks, even if they were not selected? Is there any way that we can help them, connect them?
Yeah, we definitely can. The final decision of how they would support and what they can would obviously be left to them. And a lot of these companies are partners who work with our portfolio company. So I think one suggestion I can make is, if anybody has a specific request, they can send it to us, and then we can connect them back to these guys.
So, folks, please mail a specific request that you have to be connected to a specific partner if you have someone in mind, to the mail ID soar@yournest.in, and Satish will make sure that he at least connects it to that particular ecosystem part. A question I'm going to take and send to, or ask Girish to respond to. Girish, how many made it into stage 2? Why weren't we selected, and can I apply again? This is a broad set of answers that come in. I think the why weren't we selected is really difficult to answer in specifics, but because it's a combination of factors that we looked at. But if you could respond to how many made it and can they apply again?
Is that for me, Mohit?
Yes,
I lost
yes.
you for a second. Yeah,
yes, Girish.
yeah.
How many made it to stage 2? Why weren't we selected? Can I apply again?
Sure. So out of the 1933 that we got, 64 made it to stage 2. And we are in the process of shortlisting that from a partner presentations perspective, which are scheduled for later, middle of next week. If you were not selected, you are more than welcome to apply again, but apply only when you think there has been certain developments that are meaningful for us to review your application. Don't apply just for the sake of applying. But we are happy to keep in touch with all of you. And if there are significant developments that you think are relevant from your perspective and our perspective, please feel free to share those with us. We have an online process where you can just write into us, and we will typically respond to every one of you.
All right. Thank you. I'm asking Ganesh, who's helping us to actually run the second poll, and that's come up right now while you guys respond to this, which is, do you agree that startup founders need to continuously challenge themselves and re-engineer in a dynamic environment? While you respond to this poll, Ganesh, can you minimize? Okay, I'm going to ask Vivek actually to respond to 2 questions that have come up. Vivek, the first that has come up is that, can you expand a little bit on the overlap of roles of the product manager and the user experience in software, especially in virgin markets? A question has also come up on product versus service. What do VCs want? I don't think there's any black and white answer to this, but perhaps you could elaborate on this a little bit.
Yes. Can you hear me, Mohit?
Yes.
Okay. So the first question on product manager. Product manager's job in startup or a large company is also to make sure that this person, he or she, owns the product and the product roadmap, the features that will go into the product. And for that, this person has to understand complete competitive landscape. Any competition that comes from adjacent industries, he or she needs to be aware of that. And then talk to the current customers and see what the current customers' needs are, which we are not meeting. And then balance it out with the technology development team or product team to see how much actually can we do. Obviously, the resources are limited. So product manager is a full-time role, point number 1. It is not a part-time role. Now, at early stage, in a startup, it may be difficult to hire. So the CEO plays the role, that is okay, but I have already described to you the problem that happens when the company starts getting some traction. CEO gets busy, nobody is looking for product roadmap, and the salespeople are coming and giving feedback directly to the technology team, develop this, develop that, so I can get this customer, and then it's a full chaos. And the product sort of goes on tangent. So that is on the product manager. There's no duplication of product manager role, but in the early stage, it is okay for CEO to play that role. But be aware that when you are not able to pay attention to that role, somebody needs to be there because you are betting your whole company on that product. This is the guy who can actually make you successful or can be a disaster for you. So that is the answer for question number 1. Question number 2, Mohit, was?
Which is that product versus service.
Okay, product versus services. Yeah. So remember, guys, that I and Satish and everyone told you that VCs look for companies that can grow rapidly and can become a $100 million company, let's say in 5, 6, 7 years. Product companies have much better chance of doing that because you create a product and then sell gazillions of those all over the world. Service companies have problem doing that because service element requires that your product, even if it is 70% product, 30% service, which is in many IoT cases, that is the case. There is so much customization you have to do for every customer that it takes time and your ability to scale fast becomes limited. So our preference as VCs, and not just your Nest preference, by and large, VCs will prefer a product company over a service company. However, some new areas like IoT, etc., if your service is 10% or even 15%, that can still be considered product play. So, but try to reduce, have a roadmap of reducing service to as minimal as possible. Otherwise, you will not be able to grow, and then VCs will not be as interested in you.
Thank you. Thank you. There is one more question, and I leave it to the three of you to actually chip in and answer this, which is funding. When is the right time? Do I need patents? What kind of growth plans should I be showing really a path to 100 million, or be realistic and show just humble numbers? Do you fund US-based companies with a presence in India? There's a multiple set of related questions.
Girish,
you might want to respond to this.
Yeah, so let me start from the fag end. So yes, we fund US-based companies which have connection in India. The tech team, etc. If it is in India, we are happy to look at some of those opportunities. The process is slightly longer, but there is a way to do it. So that's on that one. The other one about when is the company really fundable? This is a question which is very specific to every VC, and therefore in our case we typically are looking at opportunities which are revenue model validated in the deep tech domain, bootstrapped or maybe angel invested. We want to be the first round of institutional capital, but the product has to have a global potential footprint. So those are the 3-4 things that we look at from a funding perspective. What was the other one, Mohit?
Should I show a path to 100 million, or be realistic and show humble numbers?
Yeah, so as long as the market that you're addressing is large and you have a clearly articulated segment that you're going after, even if it is 20-50 million in the next 3-5 years, it is something that is worth looking at, as long as there is a global footprint. Because in India you will hit a glass ceiling at a $5-10-15 million revenue run rate, and therefore for you to potentially scale up and take it to the next level, you will have to go out and sell in the global markets. And that's where also your competitive landscape, and Vivek emphasized it in his presentation as well, becomes critically important, because people who you don't think are your competition in India could be your potential competition globally. Also in the post-COVID scenario, people who were your partners are now your competition, and people who were your competition are now your partners. So a lot of this ecosystem shift that is happening, one has to keep abreast with it. And you don't, as a founder, you don't want to get to a state where you're funded $2-5 million and you've scaled it well, and then suddenly you get blindsided by somebody who comes in from just under the radar and kills your model. So you have to be extremely, extremely cognizant of the competitive landscape and be aware of what's happening in the ecosystem, which could impact you directly or indirectly.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. Satish, 2 questions related, and both are I think, plucked out of your presentation, which is one is asking whether you talked about B2B playbooks that exist. Can you name a few such role model companies for B2B enterprise SaaS? And a related one, well, not related, but is on the same subject, is are India-focused B2B SaaS startups not favored? Do you specifically look for global acceptance?
Okay. So as far as playbooks are concerned, I think the most well-known and well-documented playbook is Freshworks, and the one came before that, which is Zoho. So if you look at completely 2 contrasting models, Zoho built everything bootstrap, never raised VC funding, and over a period of 20 years got to where they are. If you look at Freshworks, funded, figured out a way to very tightly segment where you have to sell, spent like crazy, to acquire customers in that particular segment and went there. So these are two of the large, well-known, popular playbooks. But if you step back from there, and let's say I will take maybe a little more simplistic and practical view, because one, Zoho took a lot of time to get there, and when traditional VCs, if you understand the structure of the funds, these are typically less than 10-year funds, which means VCs have to get out in less than 10 years. So if you are building a great business that's going to take 20 years, awesome. But that's not something that would match with VC's own, requirements. And compared to that, you take Freshworks, been raising more and more capital at higher and higher rounds, increasing ARR, and got there fairly quickly. So if I were to break that and bring it down to smaller companies that we've seen in the last few years, take a look at this company called BrowserStack. Got to a significant point in few years by just bootstrapping, and then raised one large round of capital. And I think they are somewhere in the north of 25 million ARR in about 5 years. So it's, this is again another playbook that you can look at, which is, I would generally say hybrid, but a lot of the growth came before a lot of the market segmentation and arriving at exactly the pain point, repeatable use case. I know the cost of addressing this customer came when they were bootstrapped, and they raised VC money to kind of scale that up significantly. So SaaS playbooks are possible. In fact, every year, there is this gathering of SaaS entrepreneurs called SaaS Boomi, which takes place where most of these entrepreneurs come around and are very, very generous in sharing information. And I think those who are SaaS entrepreneurs should attend some of these or work with some of these people. Again, a lot of information available on the net. There is a SaaS Boomi website that can connect you to people who have been involved in this. And that's it for you to understand the playbook.
Very, very helpful. I think very invaluable, Satish. One last question. Sorry? Sorry, Satish?
Second question, Mohit?
I think.
No, did you have a second question?
No. Yeah, it was our India-focused B2B startups not favored. Do you look specifically for global acceptance?
No. Okay. So if you look at India as an enterprise software buyer, the transition into SaaS has been happening very recently. Typically, if you look at most enterprise than Microsoft Office, they would not buy any specific software. When I say Microsoft Office, as in shrink wrap software, they probably would have ERP and other financial accounting tools who are more of a necessity, but otherwise they would not. So what we've seen with the more successful ones is, if you try to find a sub-segment of Indian enterprises, who are by their nature of business and the way they think very similar to international enterprises, then India is a great market to begin with, because the customer is right next to you, you can get quick feedback and so on and so forth. But generally, it is preferred that you go international, primarily because of the ability to be able to segment and go after niches and win those niches. Like I told you before, we have 1,500 different categories. Maybe out of that, 600 categories of products are not used in India at all. So if you are building something of that kind, go international. So it is a case-to-case basis. Fintech again is a great example where a lot of Indian companies use Tally, and that's how Tally was able to break through, right? So there will be opportunities, but in general, it depends on the customer segment and the buyer persona. The buyer persona is very important. If you are going to have a significant, persona of that buyers in India, by all means, go after the India market. But at some point of time, you have to go global.
Got it. And I think this ties in beautifully to the whole fact about positioning your brand and where you want to kind of pitch it. Who's the customer you want? Who's the customer you don't want? You've got to be very, very careful and selective and choosy. And we've got a lot of questions, but I'm going to just take one, maybe two, if there is time. Just one last question, and this one is actually coming back to Vivek. Vivek, Rajesh Gupta is asking that if, as a CEO, if I was to concentrate on product management, then I will not be able to do other stuff. And startups do not have enough funds at an early stage to focus on product management. So how do we manage this? How do you juggle the two?
Yeah, excellent question, and I briefly addressed that. That is
Yes.
how startups start. Actually, you won't have money to hire a product manager. So generally, CEO becomes the product manager, or one of the founders becomes product manager. No harm in that. No harm in that. Start that way. But the point I was trying to make is that, as you yourself said, that the CEO starts running around with sales and money raising and hiring and so on. Now, who is paying attention to the product manager role? The role hasn't gone away. You may be getting busy, and that is fair too. These are also important activities. So now you have this challenge, and every startup has this challenge. And also, I'll tell you, hiring a good product manager in India is not a joke. So that creates the problem even more challenging. So what can I do? What can you do? What can I suggest? I think it's okay to start with CEO or one of the founders playing the role of product manager. Keep an eye on, are you doing justice to the role? And when you believe that you are not doing justice to the role, then either you have to give up some other thing. One of the founders has to give up something else. There is nothing more important than the product manager role, because you are betting the whole company on that. So if you have two founders, one has to maybe give up the other things that person is doing, and you can take up the product manager role until you can actually hire a very A-class person who can be your product manager.
Got it. Okay, I think we will have to wrap this up now. And Ganesh, can you please bring up the answers to the last poll that we ran? So this is an overwhelming 100%, that
Fantastic.
People need to challenge themselves, re-engineer. And this is very, very reassuring, because it just proves that, we're in the right space. All of us together, the team at Your Nest, all of you founders, I think we're looking at a startup ecosystem that will definitely do the world a lot of good, COVID or no COVID environment. One last thing that I want each of you, the panelists, to sum up in one line is a single message that perhaps you may want to leave our founders with. And I'll start with you, Girish, and then Satish, and then Vivek. Girish, any single message that you want to tell people who applied to the Soar program?
Sure. I think there is a lot of great work happening at a ground level in the companies that we saw. I think it is we are unfortunate that we don't have enough capital to fund more of these opportunities. But these are great opportunities to work on. They are solving large problems in a technological solution, which is truly encompassing and ring-fencible. All the best to all of you. This is the fact that you were not selected is not a reflection on you or your opportunity. It is a reflection on us in terms of our inability to fund more startups.
Thank you, Girish. Satish?
Well, just extending what Girish said, I also want to tell people that not every business is a VC fundable business, but that does not mean it's not a big business. The VCs operate under some constraints, in terms of time, and everything needs to fit according, to that. So a lot of people have built bootstrap businesses very big way, and I give Zoho an example. It takes time, but if that's what you want to do, I think you should pursue that, whether VC A or VC B is willing to give you money. Like Vivek mentioned, the hardest stuff is to leave your happy, well-paying job and start a company, and you guys have already taken that step. So good luck in your business building journey.
Thank you, Satish. Vivek, last word.
Yes, I'll repeat myself, but that is very important. I'm so proud of each of the founders, because that shackle is not easy to break. Like I told you, 35 years, I've worked with thousands of people at all levels, and they can't break that shackle. So congratulations, you have the courage to actually come here. Now you have arrived in the stadium, you are playing in front of 50,000 crowd, play the innings well. And for that, what you will have to do the best you can in every possible respect. Give it all you can. And that means 200%, not 100%. And learn throughout this process, because Learning is what will make you sharper at every stage, and make it happen, guys. And we need you. India needs you. All the best to you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Vivek. So with that, with just about 2 minutes left for our deadline, I'm going to wrap this up and thank every single person who's not just applied to the program, not just attended today's session, but encouraged us along the way. All our ecosystem partners, once again, who continue to be supporting us and helping us with the startups that will eventually be selected. Our team at Your Nest, Akshat and Sanjay Jha specifically for all the help today, and our birthday boy Ganesh for helping us put this together. So thank you, everybody. See you on the other side of COVID, and to seeing all of your startups fly very, very high in the sky. Thank you and goodbye. Have a good day. Stay safe.